So hi, welcome to this episode of History Hunters. I'm here in Daly City. It's a city high up on the hills south of San Francisco, pretty close to the San Francisco International Airport. And what brings me to this neighborhood is a blimp dropped down here, and it contained a great mystery. The two men aboard the aircraft, Navy personnel, were never found. When the blimp dropped into this neighborhood, it was a complete mystery as to where the men went. I'm going to show you where this blimp landed in this neighborhood in Daly City, and I'm also going to tell you all about this story on History Hunters. Let's start out this video by heading through San Francisco and across the Oakland Bay Bridge to where this story began on that historic day. So on the morning of August 16th, 1942, the blimp crew, the three members of the blimp crew, were going to take off here from Treasure Island and fly over to the Farallon Islands to do some reconnaissance. The payload was too heavy, 200 pounds overweight, so the third man was eliminated. The L-8 blimp was part of Airship Patrol Squadron 32, the first lighter-than-air squadron established after Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941. Originally part of Goodyear's fleet of advertising blimps, the L-8 and four other blimps had been requisitioned by the Navy and shipped to Moffett Field. The blimp had taken off from Treasure Island at 6:03 a.m. to monitor the coast for any Japanese submarines. Skies were clear that morning as it set out to fly over the Farallon Islands, head north to Point Reyes, turn south to Montara, and circle back to the Golden Gate Bridge. The pilot on board was 27-year-old Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody, a 1938 U.S. Naval Academy graduate, and 35-year-old Ensign Charles E. Adams. Both men were married, lived in Mountain View, and had exemplary service records. In fact, Adams was at Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack of December 7, 1941, and had fired a deck gun at enemy planes. He had also been part of the ground crew during the crash of the German Zeppelin Hindenburg at Lakehurst, New Jersey in May 1937. The L-8 blimp that had become known as the Ghost Blimp had played an important role in history. It delivered parts for the B-25 bombers on the USS Hornet aircraft carrier prior to leaving for the famous Doolittle raid to bomb Tokyo. The airship had just been inspected and it was in top shape despite it having made over 1,000 trips. On this day, it was armed with a .30 caliber machine gun and carried 2 depth charges. I was stunned to find out that they've got a visitor's point, the highest point here on the island, overlooking everything. And off to this direction, there's a bunch of apartment complexes that, I haven't been to this Bay Area in quite a while. I had no idea they were building housing here. At 7:38 a.m., the crew radioed that they spotted an oil slick 4 miles east of the Farallons and were dropping down to check for a possible enemy submarine. Witnesses aboard a Liberty ship and a fishing boat would later report seeing the blimp descend to within 30 feet of the water to get their closer look. Beginning at 8:50 a.m., repeated radio calls to the airship went unanswered. Sometime between 9:30 and 10 a.m., a message was sent to all pilots flying in the area to keep watch for the L-8. At about 11:05 a.m., an Army P-38 fighter spotted the blimp near Mile Rock's lighthouse, a half-mile off the coast. Nothing seemed out of place. Shortly before noon, a person on the beach near Fort Funston looked up to see the strange sight of the blimp sagging and getting closer. The 147-foot-long dirigible touched down and then bounced into the air. In short time, the gondola was dragged into a hill, bending the propellers of its starboard engine. The crash dislodged one of the 325-pound depth charges, which rolled down the hill, but it failed to detonate. On the Olympic Club golf course, golfers were amazed to see the airship sail over the southern end of Lake Merced. As it floated over Mission Street near the top of the hill, hundreds of onlookers began noticing the errant blimp on its journey. Some got into their cars and began following it as it lost elevation and began scraping rooftops and telephone lines. The blimp finally landed in the middle of Bellevue Avenue, with this upturned gondola resting against a telephone pole, its engines pointed at the ground. So I'm in the 400 block of Bellevue, And this neighborhood really hasn't changed a whole lot since World War II. This is the exact location where the blimp went down, right here by this telephone pole. The blimp came in off of this area from the coast. The Pacific coast is over that way. And the blimp landed right here. This building looks absolutely the same as it did back in 1942 as the two-story house next to it. Now, back then, that lot was empty there where that house is. And this lot right over here was also empty. But the blimp landed right here. It actually ended up tilted off to the side. The helium part of the balloon kind of deflated, and it came down at about just a little bit before noon. That's when it happened. The huge helium envelope had deflated and began dragging over the 1928 Dodge sedan, which was being waxed by its owner, who ran to safety as the enormous airship descended upon him. Thousands of onlookers quickly clogged the neighborhood, and immediately everyone strained to spot any crewmen, but there was no trace of them. The gondola's door was open. All 3 parachutes were aboard the blimp, ruling out the possibility that the men used them to bail. Officials were alarmed that a file containing classified information was inside the gondola. Losing those documents would have been a court-martial offense for any serviceman, thus Cody and Adams would not have left those documents behind by choice. In the moments following, the military theorized that the 2 men may have been thrown to the ground when the gondola hit the cliff, but there were no bodies and the men never materialized. Did a sudden, violent downdraft cause the blimp to be pushed down towards the ocean and the men panicked and jumped into the water? But all 3 parachutes were still on board the blimp, as was its rubber life raft, and a search was fruitless. Besides, the men had a working radio yet did not send out any distress signals. Perhaps the craziest theory was that the men were abducted by aliens mid-air. 82 years later, the Navy still doesn't have an explanation, but the most plausible is that a defective door latch could have allowed the first man to fall overboard while inspecting the oil slick, and the other fell while trying to grab him. The men likely would have died on impact. Why then would both men who were wearing flotation devices never wash up on shore? Could a shark got them both? We may never know, since the bodies were never recovered. Now, at the time of the crash, there was a 1928 vintage automobile that was being whacked right where this car is. So much history that happened right here long ago, right at this pole. I'm sure it's probably not the same pole, but it's the same pole location as this. Experts explained that the sag in the top of the airship was due in part to the men's weight leaving the ship. The blimp would have risen to 2,500 feet, at which time an automatic relief valve would have opened, releasing helium and bringing the airship down again. With the blimp now weighing less and its envelope softened, the gondola's weight would have pulled down at the center, causing the dimple at the top. So I think it's pretty cool that I made it here finally. I've been planning to come here for several years, and of course the day that I picked to come here, it had to be a drizzly, overcast day. I was hoping to be here kind of the same time of year that the blimp went down, which was in August. But to think that all of this commotion happened during World War II right here, and nobody still can figure out what happened to the 2 men that were aboard that blimp. After a year had passed, both Cody and Adams were declared legally dead by the Navy. The L-8 was repaired and returned to Goodyear after the war. The blimp was renamed America and sent to sporting events around the country until it was retired in 1982. The L-8 gondola is now on display as the ghost ship at the U.S. Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. So from Bellevue Avenue in Daly City, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of History Hunters. I'd be curious what you think, what happened to the 2 crewmen who were never found. It's just a mystery that has confounded authorities over these many years. I don't think anybody has the answers, and I'm sure the family, the relatives of the men who were lost, probably would like to know what happened here. But until now, it's a big mystery. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of History Hunters.